But when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, and he struck him dead because he had laid his hand on the ark. So Uzzah died there in the presence of God. You might think, why would God be mad at somebody for trying to, steady something so valuable and keep it on the cart? But I think there was only, a very specific subset of people who were maybe even allowed to touch it at all. And I think even then, they had some sort of, covering between them and the ark as they had previously carried it. Directly touching it was a big no-no. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so, 1 Chronicles chapter 13. So far we've gone through a lengthy genealogy of the people of Israel, pretty much up through the current time as of the writing of this, which was during the Babylonian exile, to my understanding. And in fact, those exiles are kind of the target audience of this. So the reason all this history is here is to just kind of, give them a recap of everything that happened, how they're connected to it, how things went wrong, and what they can do to make it better. So we had the genealogy. There was a little bit in there about some of the exiles that actually went back to Jerusalem early, likely due to the king of Babylon wanting them to be there for the other people who just kind of got planted there by Babylon, to help those people learn their religion, so then they don't have these seemingly random terrible events happen to them, like getting mauled by lions. Apparently that was a regular occurrence. Or at least stuff like that was regular enough that they deemed there was a correlation and thought, hey, let's teach these folks about the local religion, so maybe then the god of the area will be appeased and these people will stop dying so much. But, and then it got into more so just history of the kings of Israel, starting with Saul, and how he kind of disobeyed God, thus really kind of initiating that history, so to speak, of leaders of Israel disobeying God. And then we went to David, and now it's focused on him and some of the stuff that he did. So, that leaves us where we are in 1 Chronicles 13. Here we go. David consulted with all his officials, including the generals and captains of his army. Then he addressed the entire assembly of Israel as follows. If you approve, and if it is the will of the Lord our God, let us send messages to all the Israelites throughout the land, including the priests and Levites in their towns and pasture lands. Let us invite them to come and join us. It is time to bring back the ark of our God, for we neglected it during the reign of Saul. The whole assembly agreed to this, for the people could see it was the right thing to do. So David summoned all Israel, from the Shihor Brook of Egypt in the south, all the way to the town of Lebo Hamath in the north, to join in bringing the ark of God from Kiriath Jearim. Then David and all Israel went to Baalah of Judah, also called Kiriath Jearim, to bring back the ark of God, which bears the name of the Lord, who is enthroned between the cherubim. They placed the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from Abinadab's house. Uzzah and Ahio were guiding the cart. David and all Israel were celebrating before God with all their might, singing songs and playing all kinds of musical instruments: lyres, harps, tambourines, cymbals, and trumpets. Okay, I'm gonna pause there for a sec. So, this is getting back to David moving the Ark of the Covenant and, wanting it. I believe he's moving it to Jerusalem, which has, he made Jerusalem essentially the capital of his kingdom after taking it over, partially because it was already like a well-fortified, possibly even in other ways defensible city, made for a really good stronghold, really good place to be able to protect things. So, what's more important to protect than, one of the key symbols of their covenant with God, of the one who has put them in this land, allowed them to, actually settle in it, whereby also pushing out the people who lived there before, and, pretty much everything that they have, they owe to God. So, protecting the Ark of the Covenant is a very important thing. And I think it had even been established before all of this that, there was something about the Ark of the Covenant that, if it wound up anywhere else, they often got, plagues of various kinds, and it's just all kinds of trouble. Meanwhile, if the Israelites had it, not so much. But it had been taken, I think, in a particular battle by another kingdom, but then they just kind of ditched it after having all these problems, all these plagues and whatnot, and it wound up, that's how it wound up in Kiriath Jearim, if I remember right. So, David realizes this and is like, okay, wait, this is not gonna work. We can't just have this sitting in some random spot on the outskirts of our kingdom. Let's bring it into the capital and protect it. So, he has this idea, tells his officials, they all agree, they assemble everybody, and there's a big celebration as they're bringing it into Jerusalem. Couple of notes here. At the end of verse 1, Hebrew says, the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, instead of talking about generals and captains. It would have more literally said the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, but it's basically the same idea as generals and captains. But there was another note down here in verse 6. It's talking about bears the name. Could be read as the Ark of God, where the name is proclaimed. The name of the Lord who is enthroned. Yeah. Now, name there in that note is capitalized because it's referring to, the Lord, God, Yahweh, whichever, point is, it's talking about, the Lord, their God. And as such, even saying the name, referring to his name, they're capitalizing it there. Just as you would capitalize, capital G God, rather than little g God, referring to some other idol or something like that. Note from the chat, Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant in battle in 1 Samuel chapter 4, or somewhere in that range for sure. I definitely even remember a couple of those chapters being the Philistines had the Ark of the Covenant, and then the town where it was, people started getting boils or something else, or maybe they were getting infested with rats, maybe both. Some plague like that happened to them, so then they passed it off to another city, and then it happened there, and they passed it off to another city, and about, 5 cities in total later, they're, like, generally realizing, okay, this is a problem. We're thinking that this thing here that we got from Israel is the problem, so let's just plop it on a cart, send the cows pulling the cart off in this direction toward there. They end up wherever they end up. We're done with this. And that's how it got to Kiriath Jearim, a.k.a. Bela of Judah. So then David took action and decided to bring it back, kind of away from sort of the outskirts of the kingdom and into the very defensible capital city. Okay, on to verse 9. When they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, and he struck him dead because he had laid his hand on the ark. So Uzzah died there in the presence of God. David was angry because the Lord's anger had burst out against Uzzah. He named that place Perez Uzzah, which means to burst out against Uzzah, as it is still called today. Today obviously being when this was written, not today necessarily. It might still be called that today, but that's not the point. Anyway, let's just wrap up the chapter and then have some additional conversation and thoughts and whatnot. David was now afraid of God, and he asked, "How can I ever bring the ark of God back into my care?" So David did not move the ark into the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath. The ark of God remained there in Obed-Edom's house for 3 months, and the Lord blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he owned. And then after realizing all the good things that came upon the house and some further prayer and discussion, then I think they eventually do bring it all the way back to the city of David, aka Jerusalem. But, you might think, why would God be mad at somebody for trying to, steady something so valuable and keep it on the cart? But, first off, we're not real sure of the details. Uzzah could have been acting a little bit paranoid about it. Maybe it was just a little bump, and he was all like, "Oh, no," when really it just, shifted slightly. But also, it was declared by God that, nobody, except maybe some of the priests or the Levites, were allowed to touch it. Although, wasn't Uzzah a priest of some sort? Did it mention him? It just says their names. It doesn't. But I think there was only a very specific subset of people who were maybe even allowed to touch it at all. And I think even then they had some sort of covering between them and the ark as they had previously carried it. So directly touching it was a big no-no. So because that command was broken, that's why God burst out in anger against Uzzah here. But that understandably gives David pause to be like, okay, hold up. If this thing's causing trouble like that, do I really want this in Jerusalem? Hang on. So then it stays at Obed-Edom's house in Gath for 3 months, it says. But then things turn out well there, and then, as I mentioned, eventually they do get it into Jerusalem. Maybe it'll mention that in the next chapter, maybe not. But that was already discussed back in, want to say 2 Samuel? 1st or 2nd, somewhere in there. One of the Samuels, with David as king. But, note there at Nacon, as in parallel text, that's 2 Samuel 6. Okay, so it was 2 Samuel. Hebrew reads Kidon. Anyway. But I would assume it's the same place. It might have just been known differently. Might have just had a different name at the time of the writing of this compared with 2 Samuel. So that kind of thing is also why sometimes the notes or the verses where it'll say something like, as it is called to this day, actually remains relevant, because it's like, some of these places change names over time. So if you're wanting the people to know where you're talking about, I guess then you get into a question of, okay, well, is it better to go with what it was known as before, or, like, go with the current name? I can't necessarily give an answer to that as far as which one is actually better to do. But if something is still called that to the current day, even just relative to writing something like this, then it's like, okay, well, yeah, there's this place with this name. The name has stuck, which tells you the whatever meaning and events are attached to this name are significant enough that nothing has, like, superseded the importance of that in that place. Noting that something is still called the same thing to that day means it had a little extra staying power. Not only the place, but the significance of that event. Anyway, I don't really have any other thoughts in particular related to the chapter here, so I'm going to go ahead and call it a wrap at that for 1 Chronicles 13. Okay, so I forget if I mentioned this in the main part of the recording or not, but at some point it came up in the live stream chat that, like, some of the name stuff and, you know, where it mentions something as it is still called today or whatever, even in the Bible, there was some pondering over whether that was a situation similar to, like, for example, Twitter being renamed to X or something like that, where it's like, some people want to push to change the name of this, but we all know it and still call it this other thing that it used to be. So, could be that kind of situation going on too. In any case, so yeah, chronicling David's attempt to move the Ark of the Covenant and how that got stalled for a little bit, which I guess somewhat relates to the broader theme in that, like, you know, there was Saul with his disobeying God and not really caring about some of the things that he should have, and then David noticing and caring about these things and doing things better. And at least in, you know, part of Israel, that was very much a cycle that kind of kept happening. You'd have a good ruler or two maybe, and then you'd have one ruler or multiple who just, like, completely forgot about the Lord and abandoned worshiping him, even sought out idols and stuff like that, and really that kind of back and forth. At least once the kingdom split, that definitely applied to Judah. Less so the northern kingdom of Israel, but still, chronicling some of this stuff might also be leading into that idea in a way. But in any case, yeah, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell to get updates when I post new videos so you don't miss out on any. Look down in the description for links to social media pages and all sorts of good stuff like that. You know, supporter page, Discord server, all sorts of different ways to keep up with what I'm doing and interact and all that good stuff. And of course, down in the comment section, leave any thoughts or questions that you got for me. Or suggestions for, I don't know, general video ideas, especially video games I could play or different things like that. I know it's going to be quite a ways in the future if we even get there, Lord willing. But ways to approach some Bible discussion or things like that after we do our entire Bible study. Anywho, so that's all I got for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video, or whatever the case is. Till next time, stay cool, people.